I was brought up by artists with a keen interest in diving below the surface of every little thing. My mom is a electroacoustic composer. My father was a writer. And they were full of questions. My dad was full of questions about the inner workings of a child's brain, the imagination and language, the development of language and ideas. I could never get away with saying I don't know to anything. When he would ask me questions, he demanded that I have an opinion or an idea about the questions he asked me, whether it was interviewing me about God or Santa Claus, or getting me to narrate a story about the faces in the rocks that we picked up at the beach, pointing out clear cuts and a beautiful sunset all in the same breath. Yeah. Dynamic, under the surface sort of upbringing. Both my parents are immigrated from Germany, my father as a child and my mother in early adulthood. And I don't know, there's something about the German spirit which is super inquisitive and adventurous, and in a weird way, like, there's so much convention in the background of that culture, but there also seems to be like this need to dig, get under the surface of things, and climb big mountains and travel all over the world and be a trailblazer. So yeah, that was kind of the environment I grew up in. I lived in the city, grew up in Vancouver, west coast of Canada, beautiful city on the ocean. Spent my summers in the mountains, lakes, rivers, glaciers, hiking, lots of outdoor camping, canoeing, fire building, all sorts of things. And always with an eye on just, creativity, environment, and relationship, I think, were the most important things that my parents instilled in me. And I was a bit of a project, I think. They really wanted to do things differently than their sort of staunch upbringing. They were hippies, and they wanted to, trailblaze a new way of raising children. So I was the experiment for that. I needed to call them by their names, not mom and dad. I wasn't allowed to call them mom and dad. So I had to call them by their very long German complicated names, which was pretty funny when I was like 2 years old. I tried to call my dad once, tried to switch because I wanted to be normal, and he just called me daughter, and then I kept forgetting. So, super unconventional, highly supportive, artistic kind of family, not without its dramas and traumas, but I feel like I got lucky in that way. Super grateful. I guess my work is greatly informed by my environment on the West Coast, and also here in the Kootenays, where I moved about 15 years ago with my family into a very rural, isolated place in the mountains. My background with my parents, with them being really into nature, camping. My dad had all the fishing knowledge and fire building and cooking food on the open fire out in the wilderness. We used to drive our van out to some logging road in the middle of nowhere and make a fire, and there we would cook our food and sleep and drink out of the creek. make sculptures with the rocks we found, and he would point at the mountains and tell me stories about their shapes and how they were sleeping giants and sleeping dragons, and he just never lost his sense of magic. So I would say that my work is very informed by the nature around me and how my parents really made that come alive in my mind and imagination as something to be honored and really taken seriously. The culture of the West Coast, kind of the wild coast, and pretty laid back feel, although not so much now. I'd say Vancouver is much less laid back than it was when I was growing up, but it felt like a small city back then. We used to have to wait for the boats to go under the drawbridge to get to downtown and, be out on our bikes all day. And, lots of trips to the beach and the surrounding mountains for skiing. And we used to build fires on the beach, like right in the city, and have picnics in the summer. So I'd say my work is very much just around that magic, like the magic of not only our connection to nature, but also childhood and keeping the fantasies and dreams and beauty of how a child sees the world alive within the adult mind. And I got distracted from it for, a long time in my 20s and early 30s, but my kids are grown now and I have a little more brain space and I'm out of the noise of the city and I can hear myself think again. And I'm feeling it coming back. And it's allowed me to, being out here in the quiet, in the wilderness, hearing the frogs and the birds and seeing deer walk past my window and bears walking onto my back porch and crickets and the rivers and glaciers and wind. To me, that's art. My biggest influences, I'd have to say my biggest influence is probably the environment I live in. I can hear frogs right now. They just started up. There's something really special about the quiet, which isn't actually quiet. It's actually really loud. Right now, not so much, because winter is just waning and spring's just starting. So the first timid tree frogs are starting to sing, and the blue jays have come back, and some of the songbirds. So, my environment has always been my biggest influence. And then my parents, although sometimes I hate to say that, but they're both super creative people in their own ways. And my mom is a composer of electroacoustic compositions and spent a lot of time in my childhood teaching me to listen. I don't know if you've heard of this concept of deep listening, but I would say she kind of coined the term. She's a bit of a grandmother in her field of electroacoustic composition, and my whole childhood was filled with her recordings of the world. She recorded me, my voice, and the wind and the trees and the crickets and everything you can possibly imagine, environmental sound. And she really instilled in me this sense of deep listening. Just being quiet and listening without judgment. And what is this moment? What do you notice in this moment? And no judgment, just taking it in, listening. And honestly, it really has been such a great tool for me, like to calm my nerves when I get stressed and tense. And just taking in the quiet and letting it pass over me instead of getting all riled up in my brain, which also I have a tendency to do. Hence the influence of my father, who, wow, like heavy, sad, but his face would transform completely if he was talking to a child or if he was looking at the view. He used to cry at how beautiful the view was sometimes. And then he would point out the clear cuts to me. So I had like a mixed bag of hyper awareness of environment and the importance of protecting it, and then also the sort of intellectual, philosophical questioning of humanity and what we're doing to this planet and all the sadness that goes with that reality. So with my art, I'm trying to parse those dichotomies, I guess, of bringing together the awareness and also the magic. And, crying a bit, but hopefully celebrating more. Having a nice burn of all the shit. All the extra shit gets burned in the yard. And a little dancing on the side. And a consistent art practice that I try to do in my beautiful studio every day. My focus right now, well, I'm working on a series about children, about children's fantasy worlds, imagination, dreams, mythical creatures, trying to capture the childlike wonder of looking at the world with fresh eyes and with no hang-ups or biases, just faith in oneself, which I really felt when I was a child until I was about 7, just this maybe blind faith, but true faith in my place in the world and the environment I was in and that I was part of it. So I'm working on a series right now featuring children in kind of abstract natural environments, possibly also some urban environments, because I did grow up in the city, even though I had a lot of time out in the bush. But just trying to tap into that sense of wonder that children have that is unfiltered, unbiased, fresh eyes, and like totally open and deeply connected. That's what I'm focusing on right now. Also, focusing on anti-chaosing my land and living space. Living out here in the wilderness, the forest is always trying to eat your house and your garden. So I spend every spring cleaning, clearing, burning, and envisioning the next painting series, which often starts either in the spring or in the fall. I often paint most deeply in the winter, the deep winter, when there's 4 feet of snow on the ground and it's too cold to do anything else except paint by the fire. So I often do that. And then sometimes I start a series in the spring, taking me through summer, which is sometimes way too hot, many mosquitoes, and unfortunately the wildfire situation has been pretty bad up here in Canada. So Sometimes you need to hide inside away from the smoke that can blanket the valley for, a month at a time sometimes in the summer. So I usually envision my new series on the shoulder seasons of spring and fall and dive deep into creating them in spring and summer, along with my garden and snow shoveling. Yeah. What is the biggest challenge of being an artist? Well, money. Just kidding, not really. Yeah, the financial challenges of being a full-time artist are very real, especially when you live in a sparsely populated country like Canada, in the middle of nowhere. Yeah. So, yeah, financially is a big challenge, but lots of hours alone. I'd like to collaborate more, but like I said, I live in a pretty isolated place and there's a lot of time alone, which I actually love a lot and comes pretty naturally to me, but it can cause a bit of a vortex, and I do need to push myself to get out of my head and out of my studio and interact with other people. And I have a lot of great friends and connections, but in the day-to-day, I do spend a lot of time alone. And I would say, I don't know, the challenges that I've noticed since I started painting especially, or started devoting full time to my art, is just learning to trust the process. You spend a lot of time kind of getting stuck, wanting to give up, freaking out, thinking, why the hell am I doing this? Why am I spending months, days, years, hours on this thing that might never see the light of day, or nobody else might see it, or might amount to nothing? And, but you always, I don't know, you go to sleep, have a good meal, come back the next day, and somehow you move forward. And that's my favorite part about it, is that it's taught me to trust that it comes back. So no matter, now it's like when I get stuck or, really discouraged or feel like, what's the point of all of this? I guess the point is that I really love doing it every day. And maybe it doesn't matter if it ever sees the light of day. But if I do get hung up on the fact that it might not see the light of day and that it sucks or I'm stuck, I just take a step back. Like I said, have some food, have a sleep, and come back the next day, and somehow it just keeps going and it tells you what it wants to be. So that's the biggest challenge and the biggest gift, I guess, is patience and perseverance and really learning to trust the process. To my younger self, I'd say chill the fuck out. Like, trust. Learn to trust yourself. Don't give up. Don't be so self-critical. Like, man, there's billions of people in the world, and the best job you can do is the job of being yourself. And everyone's flailing. I used to think someone had it figured out, like someone had control of the reins of, the universe and reality, and that somehow I needed to know as much as that person just to be okay. But I would say to my younger self, learn to trust yourself by doing the work and not giving up. And connecting with the people who have an open ear and open eyes and want to share. Yeah, just chill. Don't be so hard on yourself. And man, the amount of times I've had ideas that I wrote off in an instant through overthinking and over-criticizing, and then saw someone else doing, 5 minutes later with perfect confidence and getting it out there. Yeah. I'm a bit of an overthinker. My mom said I used to, when she took me to daycare for the first time, I stood in the doorway for an hour before I would step into the room. And I didn't want to leave, but I didn't want to go in either. And I just needed some time to stand in the doorway and observe. And then I was all in. So I guess that's just how I operate. Have I dabbled in unconventional mediums or techniques? I'm not really sure if I've ever tried any unconventional mediums or techniques. I'm not sure what the conventional ones are, but I've been a self-taught artist, kind of flying by the seat of my pants most of the time. I spent a couple of years doing macro photography, which I just loved, finding the focus on very tiny, singular details of, especially like a new bud, a new bud of a flower on a branch, or a little bit of snow stuck in the crook of a tree, ripples on the water. I loved finding the beauty in these tiny little frames of detail, and then the beautiful palette of color that would come up in the blurred background behind the focus of the photo. It was kind of a mental health thing. Like, I felt pretty lost, and I took my camera out on my dog walks every morning and just found the most beautiful tiny little moments of detail that I could find, like a new leaf bud or a blade of grass with perfect raindrops on it, or a certain glint of the sun on the lake. I don't know if that's unconventional, but yeah, it was to me like a way of opening my eyes in a new way. And now, I don't know, unconventional, maybe not, but for me, maybe it's unconventional, just playing, throwing paint on a canvas, using a palette knife and a spray bottle, and just seeing what wants to be seen, wants to be created. Also, love writing poetry to go with my paintings. Also, not sure if that's unconventional, but I'm thinking about maybe adding some words to my images, like painted on just single phrases or poems, or just single words that go with the image. Maybe also unconventionally working with natural things. The sticks I find by the river that the beaver has chewed up and made these beautiful patterns with its teeth on the sticks, or collecting beautiful stones from the river and creating rock gardens and small fountains, birch bark and leaves and flowers, textiles. Yeah, I just love collecting things that are already there and putting them together to create whole new worlds. Do I listen to music or any other type of background noise while I work? Well, when I first started painting, I listened to music a lot. I'm also a dancer, so I was used to being creative in that way. So I would often put on music while I was painting and sometimes get distracted and start dancing, which was a great way to sort of get past any blocks that came up was just to move a little bit. And I get pretty inspired by music. But the last couple of years, I've been just really obsessed with podcasts and anything from science podcasts to Jungian philosophy to art podcasts, spiritually bent podcasts, stories. I don't know. I just really like listening to interesting people and smart people. My brain's kind of on overdrive, and the podcasts are kind of like how I feed it while I'm painting. And I don't know how much influence they have on what I'm actually creating. They just give my brain something to do so that I can be free in the creative space of moving my body with a paintbrush and colors and not overthinking around the painting, letting my mind overthink where it needs to by listening to podcasts. So that's my practice at the moment. I feel like I need to go back to music though, because it all gets very brainy and heady after a while with the podcasts. What's the best reaction someone has had to my artwork? Tears. I'm really good at making people cry. A lot of the reflections I get have to do with opening up areas of the heart and mind that people don't normally access or speak about, and creating a painting that's like a singular moment that describes a feeling. I guess what I'm going for is not a thing, but a feeling. And so I try to create a certain feeling in my paintings, and it may not translate the same way to everybody, but I get a lot of tears from people and also a lot of joy. My series called Polar Opposites, which was pairings of animals of very opposite sizes and energies and habitat, and putting them together as characters in a really playful way that would, appeal to children and also apparently to adults a lot. So I would say delight. Happy tears is... happy tears are the reaction I get to my artwork the most. What I hope people take away from my artwork is just more depth. I just want to create depth, and I want people to think. I want people to feel. I want people to think a little more closely about where they are, who they're with, and what they're doing in that place and with that person. My dad used to say, up to the very end of his life, almost his last words, he would say, reality is the place you are, who you are with, and what you are doing together in that place. That's reality, is what he would say. So I guess what I want people to take away with my art is I like to create snapshots, like a story in a snapshot, or like a whole life in a snapshot, a moment of feeling, of depth, and of story. And not everyone will parse that information the same way or see that piece in the same way, but they'll always see a story. And in my experience, from the reflections I've gotten from people, there can be many stories within one painting. It's almost like I'm tapping into a feeling, a sense, a moment in time, not so much like a concrete narrative, but a sense of things, which is, I think, how we actually experience the world, even if we try to describe it in words and all these logical ways. Essentially, all those things are just trying to describe a feeling. A lot of my art and creativity has been inspired by moving outside of the city into the mountains in central British Columbia here in Canada. And I grew up in Vancouver, which is, 1.5 million to 3 million, depending on where you draw the boundaries, or if you include the suburbs in that count, to a very rural property just off the highway between a couple of small towns of 200 or 300 people. And life's really different out here than it was in the city. And honestly, I wasn't really doing any art when I lived in the city, not since I was a kid. I was doing a bit of video work and dance, but the visual art started to make a comeback after I'd been outside of the city for a while. And we built an art studio on our land, which I gratefully inhabited. And just the quiet out here, the lack of distraction. We have no cell phone service where I live. And for many years, we were still on dial-up internet when we first moved out here in 2009. I think we had dial-up internet until about 2011, and then not very fast internet after that. Now we've got Starlink, so, we're dialed in, but it was a different kind of last, couple decades than it was for a lot of people, and it really made a big impact on my art. I don't think I would have given my art the time of day or the time to experiment if I'd been in the city. Even though funds are always tight when it comes to life out here with the lack of jobs and opportunities, I guess you spend less money too, or, I grow a garden and I'm just not surrounded by consumer goods all the time, and so I don't need as much maybe. And it really allowed me the time and space to get bored and be inspired to go a little deeper and bring my visual art out into the world again. So I kind of started just by sketching my thoughts at the beach in the mornings when I took my dog for a walk, or I would take my camera out. And I'd like to do macro photography, so I would choose these really beautiful little frames of special moments, like a little bit of snow resting on the crook of a branch, or a perfect line of raindrops on a leaf, or with this beautiful background palette of colors that would come up when you would focus in on this tiny little detail, and then everything in the background would blur into this beautiful palette. So yeah, that was kind of my therapy for a few years, and how I got back into doing visual art. And now I've moved to painting. The pandemic really gave me the time and space and government money to paint and spend time at home. While I was going through stuff with the family, they needed me close, and so I couldn't really leave the house or have a job, and so I turned to painting, and it's been such an amazing healing journey. I knew I'd get it. I was afraid to start painting for so many years because I knew I would get obsessed, and I was right. And now I do it every day, pretty much. And if I don't, it feels strange. Sometimes I go paint because that's what I've just been doing every day for a few years, and sometimes I don't know what else to do, even though there's a million tasks staring at me on the land here. So I move between chopping firewood, digging in the garden, cooking food, taking care of the animals, and then painting. And trying to make money however I can in this very sparse rural economy out here. Still trying to find a way to make a better living from my art, but I did sell a few canvases this week, so that's pretty exciting. Yeah, something about hearing the creatures and listening to the rain on the tin roof and the birds that just showed up a few days ago for spring and watching the seasons cycle. Every year is a little different, but you notice the patterns over years of being here. Yeah, it's pretty amazing life. I wouldn't say easy, and sometimes I just want to run back to the city and hide in the distractions and the noise. But when I sink a little deeper, I wouldn't be doing art the way I am if I was in the city. So it's pretty magic.